5 seconds. And we are live.
Hello, welcome to a celebration of International Women's Day. My name is Elizabeth Bice, and I'm the Federal Treasurer of Socialist Action and member of the NDP Socialist Caucus Steering Committee. We acknowledge that this event is taking place on Indigenous lands across Turtle Island, known as North America. That includes the unceded territories of the Mississauga of the New Credit, the Wendat, and Haudenosaunee people in a place called Toronto. Today, I'm speaking to you from Jamaica, where the indigenous Taino and Arawak-speaking people began arriving here 4,000 years ago. They were wiped out by European colonial powers. We join in the fight for justice, recognizing that there can be no real reconciliation without restitution. That entails seizing the assets of the big resource corporations and returning them to the commons. Today, we are celebrating the 112th anniversary of IWD for feminism and socialism. The roots of this occasion goes back to a women's conference of the Socialist International in Copenhagen in 1910, which launched International Women's Day globally in 1911. Trotskyist parties, including the predecessor organization of Socialist Action, League for Action Socialists in the Canadian state, relaunched the modern IWD in Canada 45 years ago in 1978. We did this for good reason. Women's oppression is rooted in the capitalist system. As it does with sexism, racism, environmental destruction, and war, capitalism profits from discrimination, dispossession, and wasteful plunder of national resources. We march for bread and for roses too. We do so in the face of escalating attacks on basic human needs, a vicious pandemic that is linked to an unstable, unequal, and unsustainable economy. Women have lost most of the jobs curtailed due to COVID-19. The establishment claims that women have achieved equality are nothing but a cruel joke. On average, women are paid 25% less than men, 7,200 less than males. The gap would be bigger if not for the fact that male workers' wages have stagnated or declined. In 2023, rising inflation and high interest rates means more gendered implication on the quality of life, well-being, and access to basic needs, life, safe housing, and food. 27% of employed women work fewer than 30 hours per week, more than double the 12% of men who work part-time. 7 out of 10 part-time workers are female. Low-paid women increasingly owe more than one job to survive. The cost is particularly evident in the health sector, including the long-term care where female frontline workers have fallen victim to the global pandemic. 56% of multiple job holders are women. 2.4 million women and girls, 13.18%, lived on a low income in 2016. At the present rate, it would take another 286 years to close the global gender gap. Aboriginal women and girls suffer shameful economic and social conditions. They are systemic victims of racism, inequality, physical assault, disappearance, and murder. Most women still bear the double burden of doing most of the domestic labor in addition to work outside the home. Disproportionately, women are the victims of war, as we see today in Ukraine, in Donetsk, and in Luhansk. While trillions of dollars are wasted globally on corporate bailouts and militarism, women and girls are denied adequate education, economic opportunities, clean water, healthcare, reproductive choice, and personal security. To transform society, our demands must be sharp and clear. No money for war, RCMP off Wet'suwet'en, imperialist ends of Haiti, Cuba, and Venezuela, boycott, divestment, and sanctions against the Zionist apartheid state, end the imperialist war between NATO and Russia, negotiate, don't escalate, Canada out of NATO, end all subsidies to capital, tax big business and the rich, fund healthcare, education, and social services, provide universal, free, quality childcare and pharmacare, enforce equal pay and equal access to good jobs, no two-tier wage benefits, restore funding to women's social justice organizations, emergency shelters, and legal aid, build quality social housing, raise EI rates, and ensure real access for part-time workers, legislate at least a $25 per hour minimum wage, and end precarious employment. Phase out the Alberta tar sands development. No new pipelines, no reconciliation without restitution for Indigenous people. Conscript corporate profits to fund the conversion of industry, business, homes, and schools to renewable green energy power. For public ownership of the commanding heights of the economy under workers and community control. For a workers' government. Fight for working class political independence and for socialist policies in labor unions and the NDP. Women's liberation through a socialist revolution. No socialism without women's liberation. If you agree, join Socialist Action and work with us. And now I would like to read a poem. And the poem is by Louisa Callio, an award-winning American poet, writer, and multimedia performing artist and teacher. Louisa spends a lot of time in Jamaica with her husband, where I met her, and proud to call her my friend. Louisa has been a fighter of equality for a lifetime. This poem is titled The Weaker Sex, from one of her books, In the Eye of Balance. Figure of a woman, bare-breasted. She kneels perhaps in red stone cool on brown earth. She sinks into work. A child tied to her back. 3 scars mark her face. Her eyes half closed. Perhaps the sun burns them. Perhaps she dreams of home. Her arms outstretched, she holds the world. A clay vessel, water to carry home, sits on her head. She bears the preparations, is dinner after a hard day's work. And now I would like to turn to Comrade Sandra Griffith Bonaparte. Sandra is from Ottawa, and she will now sing the anthem of International Women's Day, Bread and Roses. Sandra immigrated in 1988 to Canada from Grenada in the Southeast Caribbean. She's got a job in the federal public service and became involved in the Union of National Defence Employees, a component of the Public Service Alliance of Canada. As president of PSAC, Local 70607 for 12 years, Sandra's outstanding leadership attracted envy and hatred from some white members in her region, especially when she gained accolades as a union spokesperson and educator on subjects like Black History Month. Her bigoted opponents filed false charges against her. UND brass removed her from office for 10 years. But Sandra fought back, and she is back, being re-elected again as local president with 80% of the votes cast. She is a member of Socialist Action in Ottawa. Welcome, Sandra.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and it's 10 months.
10 months, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I say 10 years?
Yes.
Well, they might have tried, but they wouldn't have got away with it anyway.
Oh, man. Give me 1 second. Oh, I lost my words here. 1 second. Goodness. Good. Yeah.
Okay, sister, take your time.
As we go marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 men arrayed, and touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we come marching, marching, we battle to from men, for they are women's strength. I shall be sweating from birth until life closes, on stoves as well as body, Give us bread, but give us roses. As we go marching, marching, unnumbered women dead, were crying through our singing, their ancient song of red, smaller than love and beauty, their drudging spirits knew. Yes, it is bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we come marching, marching, we bring the greater days. The rising up of woman means the rise. No virgin island, tender toils when one reposes, but a sharing of life's glory bring us bread and roses, bread and roses. Our life shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starved as well as bodies. Give us roses, give us roses.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Thank you. Our first guest speaker is in France, where it is past 1 a.m. now. Angela Stephanatos teaches science of technology in a public middle and high school in Paris. She has been an active member since 1986 of the largest teachers union in France, the SNES. Angela belongs to our sister organization, Anti-Capitalist Revolution Inside, the NPA. The government led by President Emmanuel Macron is trying to impose a law that would raise the age of retirement and reduce pensions, a so-called reform that will negatively impact women even more than male workers. But a general strike is on the agenda. So welcome, Comrade Angela.
Thank you for receiving me, and well, I'd say it's late in the night here, but I'm in great shape, and I was waiting for this appointment so we can speak about the most important thing that's happening in France. It's a counter-reform, but it's not the first. Since 1993, we've had several counter-reforms of pensions that have always aimed to increase the number of years and work, and therefore contributes in reducing the amount of years of retirement and the pensions themselves. Each time women suffer more from the attacks, since they are less paid, so their pensions are directly impacted. They make up to 80% of part-time jobs. Most women, 1 on 2, are the members, people who work on part-time jobs, against 1 man out of 10. They make 60% who earn the minimum wage, which is in Canadian dollars, $1,892 per month before taxes. You cannot live with that. Jobs are mostly cleaning, cashier, home help, medical care, and social work. They earn on average 22 to 25% less than men. I just heard you before, and it is exactly the same situation in France. And their pensions are 40% less than men. Currently, they are forced to retire later than men at the age of 62 years and 7 months in average. However, they have the legal right to leave at 62. And why is that? It's very simple. It's that every quarter missing is on minus. That means you lose 1.25 for every quarter missing. Not only you don't make as much as you're supposed to, but you're punished. And that's the law that was applied in 2010 implemented. To erase this discount of 1.25, that means 5% per year missing, you have to work till the age of 67, which is enormous. Most people cannot stand it. Jobs are tough, and many women find themselves without jobs, men too, past the age of 58. This reform, if it passes, will amplify existing inequalities, whose immediate effect would be an increase of 9 months for women against 5 months for men. And women will lose also the right of acquiring 2 years, the value of 2 years for their retirement for each child they've bared. That also will be erased, and that will make it much tougher. In the public sector, the result will be 17.5% reduction in service and public service pensions. In some professions where they benefit for, they can leave at the age of 55, they find themselves leaving immediately within a few months at the age of 59. Those people who work caregivers in hospitals. Nurses in 2010 could retire at the age of 50, 55. They changed the law, and they now will, if this law passes, will be able to retire at 64. That means 9 years later. This is really a very nice way of thanking their commitment during the pandemic crisis. I mean, this is, no one wants to be a nurse today. On the other hand, private insurers like Enron and BlackRock, because we want to know what's going on. Why is the government, why are all these governments pushing for these reforms each time? And it's getting worse. Who benefits from this crime? Enron, BlackRock, private insurers would have everything to gain because a certain number of private and public employees, 30 million, would be forced to take out a supplementary pension in order to be able to live, because their reduced pensions would no longer be sufficient. There is a big loot. That means pensions each year are 330 billion euros, which makes 480 billion Canadian dollars. That is the order of the state budget. Now, there's a lot of money there, and that's why insurers are very interested in privatizing the system. And that's what motivates the governments and the past governments and this government. The poorest workers, a majority of women, but also men and foreigners, will be dead by that time because they have a life expectancy of 7 years less. So on the other hand, the government, which is at the service of the employers, could continue to lower and reduce what is they're obliged to pay and contribute that feeds the pensions, which are different social funds that they have to pay with the salary workers. And that permits them to make more benefits and profits. So there's a double interest in changing the system, which normally should be completely controlled by workers because it's our salary and it belongs to us. So our social contributions are also our salary, the so-called total employer cost. As far as the civil service is concerned, the government's mission is to lower taxes on income, which they've already done, and with tax on large wealth and on companies, corporate taxes. They've lowered them from 33 to 25%. And they've also lowered other kinds of taxes for rich people. So these are understood, and they're the reasons why they are premeditated social crimes. For me, there's premeditated. I mean, there's no other reason. And they're constantly telling us that it's deficitary, which is absolutely not true. And official councils have given the count we are exceeded. We're a surplus. We have a surplus of 3.8 trillion Canadian dollars this year, 2021. And in 22, we had 3.7 billion euros. That's 5.3 trillion Canadian dollars. Sedentary surplus. That's so there is no reason and no need to change the system. They predict that there'll be a problem in 2032, but by that time we could also have a raise of 5% in our salaries, and that would compensate what could be missing, which would be only approximately 5% of the total budget, which is a lot of money.
30 seconds.
After 4 very important days of combat, we have to get into it. And women are getting into the fight because they are really the first to be hit. Many other questions emerge concerning wages and inflation and society and how it functions. And we wish that a general strike will prevail and win the battle. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Angela. I'm hoping that maybe someday soon you can come back and have more time with us and tell us more about what's going on in France. Thank you so very much, sister.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next speaker is Comrade Rubina Chowdhury. She's a feminist activist, a writer in the Bengali language, born in Bangladesh. She often writes in English as well. As a rape crisis center worker and a member of Socialist Action in Toronto, Rubina is associated with 2 magazines at the center. 1, The Power of Voices as a writer, and 2, Cleavage as an editor. Currently, she is writing short stories in Bengali based on feminist and mental health issues and translates poems and stories from English to Bengali. And she plans to translate her Bengali poems into English. Welcome, Rubina.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This is really long introduction, whatever I am not that much. So today I'm talking about that the funding, how the funding policies of Ford government for rape crisis centers in Ontario. That's really bizarre. So I don't know many of you knows about it or not, but I'm trying to focus on it. I collect some statistic, and so all rape crisis center were funded till 2019 by Ministry of Attorney General. First funding increased in 2018 when Kathleen Wayne was in a position as a premier. So she announced 33% for the province's rape crisis centers, all centers, as 44 centers, as part of the End Gender-Based Violence Strategy. In that time, funding increased into $1 million. In fall of 2017, 8 centers, think about it, 8 centers among 44 received that $1 million. In 2018, Ministry of Attorney General announced for TRCC $159,000 increased and promised it for 3 years. They promised that it will continue for 3 years. Only for the major one, actually, most of the funded received by every year by Toronto Rape Crisis Centers. I will talk about that. This is not a very equal thing, but yes, Toronto Rape Crisis Center received most of it, and many of the other centers in Ontario, especially the remote area, they need more, but they don't have any fund for, I don't know, zero. So in 2019, Ford government created anti-human trafficking fund because at that time the Me Too movement started. All rape crisis centers fund is now under till now anti-human and sex trafficking fund, and they moved rape crisis centers funding from Ministry of Attorney General to Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services. So in this sector, part of the fund goes to the police department. Police receive because they think, okay, they have to control sex trafficking and human trafficking. Police only can do it. So the fund goes there. We don't know how much they are receiving, but they work with them. In 2019, media announces 2 million in social services. From that amount, only 1 to 8 centers got some. Rest of 22 centers didn't get anything. And highest amount always received by TRCC, I said, and that time they received 83, not 159 anymore, because they changed the ministry to reduce the amount. Lowest amount received by Hamilton, Rape Crisis Center of Hamilton, they received 17,000. So, and remote areas, 0. So remote areas travel sometimes, like Perry Sound, Muskoka. They sometimes from there, survivors fly to get counseling. 2 hours sometimes they drive to have counseling. Think about it. They're survivors and they're having a really very difficult time to get only the counseling. Yeah, those remote areas are totally off. Government doesn't care about them. So 2020, they received 11 million, and not received, they increased 11 million in gender-based violence sector. But Coalition of Rape Crisis Center, it means all rape crisis centers could not count that money and on that fund. There is no clarity who is receiving the money and how much, when, where that goes. None of the rape crisis centers knew, though they also work for gender-based violence. So PC government is leaving survivors behind in the time when multiple allegations of sexual misconduct had surfaced against various members of the PC party. Actually, 2018, we know many of them. Rape and sexual violence increased in Ontario last year, if you count this pandemic period, 40%. So altogether, men and women in 2001 to 2022, 30% women cases are higher than men cases. 87% rape committed against women. So this 40% was that we got from a statistic. These are from police report. So think about the police report. Usually survivors or victims, they don't go to the police. And if you see that statistic, 6 people among 100 victim goes to the police. So if police says that is 40%, so actually how much it could be that we don't know. So survivors come to the rape crisis center. They don't go to the police department. They come to us to talk to for hours. They use our crisis line. They use our face-to-face counseling, and I will talk about that later. So all rape crisis centers deeply concerned to know where the current government stands when it comes to educate women in gender diverse people, children of indigenous communities, and survivors of sexual violence. So OCRCC, Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Center, demands PC government commit to the same funding underscore. Same funding means that the Liberal Party committed. That's 1 million for all rape crisis centers, underscore in gender-based violence strategy, 33% increased over 3 years to all 44 rape crisis centers across Ontario, and other gender-based violence support services in original agreement. OCRCC also demand the restatement of the 2015 school curriculum and all gender identities be included in government policies going forward. These issues remain reconnected. The government for the people shouldn't be making survivors across Ontario wait longer anymore or decrease the waiting list. Survivors wait months. Actually, survivors in only TRCC, I know that's 18 to 20 months they wait. It's really long. So think about their mental health, how they are feeling, if they don't get the counseling even, they are not getting, treatment cannot help them that much because they are not getting treatment either. So what they are having, only one way they can get the counseling. And most of the rape crisis centers, counselors are volunteers. Because
30 seconds.
and survivors, that's really bizarre because these volunteers, how they can run, only TRCC, they funded, the fund they received, they can hire only 8 part-time and full-time staffs. So immigrant survivors, especially more vulnerable because they need interpreter, they need cultural, someone from culture, their own culture, they feel that to their comfort zone, they really like to do, but if there are no volunteers from same culture, it is really not helpful for them. And male survivors, the most difficult is male survivors. They cannot get any help because they don't want to first time, and after that they are longer list. I don't know why, but it is true. Male survivors, that they got the longer list than women survivors. We oppose all cuts the economic situation. This changes Ontarians to have access to social services besides
Wrap up.
healthcare. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Next is Florencia Shade. She is a leading member of Socialist Action, living in Simshaw territory around what is not now called Terrace, British Columbia. She is a mother, community advocate, and a lifelong learner who has set her sights, yes, you're right, set her sights on overthrowing capitalism. So now she's going to sing a song, her song, and it's titled Contradictions. Welcome, Flo.
Hi, yes, thank you. Yeah, so this was originally going to be a poem, but as I was writing it, I remembered this old melody that I had come up with a long time ago, but I never really found the right words for. So I thought I could bring them together, and I think it kind of worked out. The way we say we're kind, contradictions everywhere. Look, it's not what was promised me, as what we see is how we need increasingly. Open up your eyes. See truth without disguise. Realize, no, they're not on our side, but we can get organized. 'Cause we're not fine. They say we're fine. We know they're lying. We can't see common ground. Looking up, remember we are strong in numbers, tenacity, contradiction. Thanks for bearing with me
Okay.
there. It's very nervous. It's been a long time.
So, no, it was wonderful. Your voice was wonderful, but unfortunately, I tell you so because you're going to sing again. We couldn't hear your guitar, but your voice was beautiful. We couldn't hear your
Sorry.
guitar at all.
The guitar wasn't the best, so.
Yes, no, your voice was wonderful. So I just wanted to tell you so you'd be prepared because I know you're going to sing again. Okay, thank you, comrade. Thank you very much. Okay, so our next speaker is Tamara Lawrence, and she is a member of the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom Canada. She is currently a PhD candidate in global governance at the Baselli School for International Affairs at Wilfrid Laurier University. Tamara is also with the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute and on the advisory committee of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, World Beyond War, and the No to NATO Network. Welcome, Tamara.
Good evening, everyone. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you very much to Socialist Action for the invitation. It's really nice to celebrate with you all and to listen to the other speakers and performers. So the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women Conference is underway in New York City for the next 2 weeks. Tens of thousands of women from around the world are there sharing their stories and struggles. The Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, the organization that I'm with, has a delegation there. And they brought these really lovely purple buttons to pass out and a big banner with our message, Women Unite for Peace and Disarmament. And they were out on the streets today in Manhattan with our message. We need to rise up and unite for peace and disarmament because our so-called feminist federal government is waging a war at home and abroad. Over the past decade, Canadian military spending has increased by 70% to $35 billion. Canada is ranked 13th highest in the world for military spending. And with all of this money, the federal government has announced plans to buy new F-35 warplanes, attack helicopters, armed drones, build new warships, and recruit more soldiers. The Liberal government is buying costly, carbon-intensive weapon systems while more Canadians are struggling to make ends meet. More Canadians are using food banks. There is more housing insecurity and homeless encampments across the country, and the climate emergency is getting worse. Shamefully, no woman in Parliament from any political party is calling for military spending to be reduced and reallocated to these urgent social and environmental needs. Over the past 2 decades, Canada has partnered with the United States and NATO to wage wars against other countries, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and Syria. We have caused so much death and destruction with no accountability. Now we are waging a war against Russia through Ukraine. Over the past year, Canada has sent approximately $1.5 billion worth of ammunition, sniper rifles, machine guns, howitzer artillery guns, rocket launchers, hand grenades, advanced missile system, and tanks to Ukraine. Thousands of Ukrainian and Russian soldiers and civilians have been killed, and millions have been displaced. Yet in an interview, our Foreign Affairs Minister, Melanie Joly, said, quote, "It's not time to talk about peace. It's time to arm them." Not once before Russia's invasion or after has Canada's top diplomat used diplomacy and met with her Russian counterpart to end the conflict. Not once has Canada called for a ceasefire and negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. This war could have been avoided and it could be stopped immediately. In Parliament, the NDP's foreign affairs critic Heather McPherson and Green Party leader Elizabeth May also support weapons to Ukraine and have not proposed any peace plan. Canada exports weapons not only to Ukraine to prolong the war and suffering, but to repressive governments of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and the UAE, and the apartheid state of Israel. Canada is ranked 17th highest in the world for arms transfers. Canada also has illegal sanctions, forms of economic warfare against Venezuela, Russia, China, Nicaragua, and other countries that are really harming women and girls. Despite the myths that we tell ourselves, Canada is not a peacekeeping country. Canada is currently ranked 70th in the world, very low on the list, with only 59 soldiers wearing the UN blue helmet out of an armed force of 95,000 soldiers and reserves. By contrast, Canada has thousands of NATO soldiers on NATO operations. NATO, of course, is a US-led nuclear-armed military alliance of 30 wealthy Western countries that is waging war and making women's lives more insecure all around the world and is harming Mother Earth. So this is why our Canadian women's peace organizations, VOW and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom Canada, are calling for Canada to get out of NATO and for the alliance to be abolished. VOW has a campaign called Feminists Against Militarism, Women Say No to NATO. WILF Canada has a campaign called Demilitarize, Decarbonize, Decolonize for peace, gender justice, and climate justice. We encourage you to join us and get involved and active. Finally, we need a radical transformation of Canada's foreign policy that is based on nonviolence and solidarity. We need an ethic of care to guide what Canada does in the world, and we need to repair the harm that we have done to other countries. We also need the courage to transcend this new Cold War that we find ourselves in, and we need to make friends with our so-called enemies. This is why last November, I traveled to Egypt, Russia for my first time, Finland, Latvia, Poland, and Romania for 4 weeks. And I talked to women from all walks of life using people-to-people diplomacy, strategic empathy, and peace building. This is the way that we can unite as women and allies for peace and disarmament. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara, and thank you for all the work you do. Our next speaker is Comrade Emily Stairs. She's a leading member of Socialist Action Canada based in Guelph, Ontario. She helped to organize a union for teaching assistants at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo and now sings in the community, works as a music teacher, and is a co-host on the Red Review. She will address the recent strike by Ontario workers. So welcome, Emily.
Hello, thank you all, and thank you to all of the amazing comrades who spoke before me. Especially, I'm very much looking forward to hearing more about Tamara's adventures around the world as a peacekeeper and peace finder. So yes, today I am going to be talking about something that a lot of you here in Ontario have heard a lot about, but some of you outside of the province may not know as much about, particularly our international comrades, and that is the events of this past November and the closest we have come to a general strike. So yeah, this past fall, we had fascinating developments in labor relations here in Ontario, where we saw the demonstration of rank and file power, the likes of which have not been witnessed since the Mike Harris days of action in the 1990s. On Friday, November 4th, 55,000 education support workers who are members of CUPE Ontario's School Board Council of Unions, they took a mass strike action after the Ontario Conservative government of Premier Doug Ford passed Bill 28. Now, for those who don't know, Bill 28 relied on the notwithstanding clause to completely override charter rights to bargain freely and to be able to strike at all. It also imposed wages and conditions on workers without negotiation or arbitration, completely superseding the bargaining process. It further imposed monstrous fines on any striking union or workers. So this is obviously a blatant attempt to erode workers' rights and a workers' democracy, even more than it already has been, by various pieces of Ford legislation, including the wage capping bill 124, which has kept public sector wages at no more than 1% since 2019. It is no coincidence that this legislation was imposed on the backs of education workers and school support staff. These are the lowest paid education workers in the province, making roughly $39,000 a year. And the vast majority of these 55,000 workers are women. In fact, I was quite struck by one of the stories shared to CBC by the president of CUPE Local 1358, Darlene Sawchuk. She shared this story of an EA who was in her mid-40s who got hit with a really bad financial double whammy. Sawchuk says her car died and she had to choose between having a car payment or paying rent because she could not afford to do both. She is a full-time permanent employee with seniority who ended up choosing transportation over rent so that she could physically get to work. So she gave up her apartment. She was camping out in the office on really cold days, and she had a Planet Fitness membership just so that she could have a shower and be able to access basic hygiene. This is the position that people find themselves in because of the inflationary crisis, because of the stagnation in wages, and because of the systematic erosion of workers' rights and the devaluation of women's labor. The Ford government made a bet that students, parents, workers in Ontario wouldn't care enough about these workers, these systematically devalued and undervalued workers. Fortunately, the Ford government lost that bet big time. In response to the existential threat of Bill 28, massive labor protest action began, including well over 10,000 CUPE members and allies rallying at Queen's Park, and thousands more at MPP constituency offices all over the province. Many activists, recognizing the existential threat that this bill posed, began to call for a general strike. CUPE workers were galvanized, other public and private sector union employees were galvanized. There was genuine excitement among labor and popular support among the general public about the prospect of a larger strike. To the surprise of many of us who've been involved in labor organizing over the past however many decades, this call was actually heeded by labor leadership, spearheaded by the OPSEU SEFPO leader, JP Hornick, who is a newly elected president and is doing wonderful things. So she helped encourage solidarity action among OPSEU members, and she was helping get ready for escalating further actions leading to the potential general strike in November. Support also came not just in solidarity strikes, but also financial support to help deal with the crippling fines that the Ford government was threatening to impose. Unions across Canada pledged millions of dollars in support of these low-wage school support workers. This is one of the strongest displays of cross-union solidarity that we've seen in Canada for a very long time. So clearly Ford knew the jig was up. The Premier's office made a last-minute unexpected promise to rescind Bill 28, and while this was a huge victory for the labour movement and for marginalised workers, many felt that we could have gone further. The vast majority of unions, public and private, were ready to go with mass strike action that could have repealed not only Bill 28, but also Bill 124, and perhaps even ousted this anti-labor premier entirely. Alas, union leadership decided to acquiesce, and in a show of good faith, they put any further strike action on hold, effectively dissipating the massive amount of energy that the rank and file had mustered in the weeks leading up to the strike. But I would say, how can there be a show of good faith towards a government that has been targeting vulnerable workers whenever there is an opportunity to do so? How can we negotiate in good faith when we know for a fact that this government does not deal honestly with workers and will undercut any gains we try to make? Particularly during the current inflationary crisis driven by war and climate change, we cannot afford to allow any stagnation and devaluation of our labor. Fields that have been traditionally dominated by women's labor continue to be systematically devalued. And we see this today. As austerity budgets come through, women's labor tends to be first on the chopping block. And this is especially apparent now with the growing fight between Ontario and the Nurses Association, which is the first new contract being negotiated outside of the reach of Bill 124, a bill which I will remind listeners has been declared unconstitutional by the Ontario Superior Court. And of course, the Ontario government is wasting even more money challenging this unconstitutional bill. And while the Ontario government boasts a surplus budget, our hospitals are hemorrhaging staff to the point of emergency room closures all over the province, particularly in rural areas. Nurses' wages range from between $34 to $49 an hour, and that's with 25 years of seniority. But they are the backbone of the healthcare system. And meanwhile, the Premier tries to pull us towards a privatized healthcare model, which will see worse outcomes for poor, marginalized, and working class people. We need strong labor action more than ever, and the Ontario Nurses Association needs the full support of all workers across the country and across the province. As JP Hornick said, the labor movement should not be standing down, but standing by. The time for action is fast approaching. Some might even say the best time for action would have been yesterday. It is essential that we listen to the women of the labor movement and recognize the urgency of this fight for healthcare, for safe schools, for equal treatment, and fair wages. Thank you.
Oh, Elizabeth, you're muted.
I knew I would pull that at least once during the show. Okay, so now we're going to go back to Flo, who's going to sing Freedom by Anthony Hamilton. You're on, Flo.
Okay, thanks. This time, hopefully you'll hear a bit more of the guitar. Felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. Pressure to break or retreat, then return. Facing the fear that the truth I discovered. No telling how all these will work out, but I've come too far, go back down. I'm looking for freedom. I'm looking for freedom. To find it because everything I have, I'm looking for freedom. I'm looking for freedom. To find it may take everything I have. I know all too well it don't come easy. The chains of the world, they seem to move in tight. Try to walk around, but the stumbling is so familiar. Trying to get up, but the doubt is so strong. There's gotta be a winning in my bones. I'm looking for freedom. I'm looking for freedom, and to find it cost me everything I have. I'm looking for freedom. I'm looking for freedom, to find it, make it everything I have. I'll leave it there.
Wow, that was beautiful, beautiful. For sure.
Elizabeth, you are muted.
Again, sorry, comrades. Okay, we're going to move on to Helen Smith, who is a longtime feminist, socialist, and member of Socialist Action in Vancouver, BC. She has been active in the campaign for affordable housing and is currently working on issues concerning seniors, housing, and climate change. Helen does the segment on the Red Review called We Are Not Sponsored By. She will recite the poem Equality by Maya Angelou. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Equality. You declare you see me dimly through a glass that will not shine, though I stand before you boldly, trim in rank and marking time. You do own to hear me faintly as a whisper out of range, while my drums beat out the message and the rhythms never change. Equality, and I will be free. Equality, and I will be free. You announce my ways are wanton, that I fly from man to man. But if I'm just a shadow to you, could you ever understand? We have lived a painful history. We know the shameful past, but I keep on marching forward and you keep on coming last. Equality, and I will be free. Equality, and I will be free. Take the blinders from your vision, take the padding from your ears, and confess you've heard me crying, and admit you've seen my tears. Hear the tempo so compelling, hear the blood throb in my veins. Yes, the drums are beating nightly, and the rhythms never change. Equality, and I will be free. Equality, and I will be free.
Thank you, Helen. Okay, we're going to move now to April Ellis. She's a new member of Socialist Action in Essex County. She is a prominent voice in the campaign to stop capitalist powers proposing new polluting gas plants in Windsor, Ontario. And she also loves the outdoors, and she has turned a large part of her property into a natural garden to raise monarch and swallowtail butterflies. Welcome, Avril.
Hi, thank you for having me. Good evening, everyone. And I just want to wish everyone a happy International Women's Day. Climate change is a fundamental threat to all life on this planet, including humanity. It will and has already greatly impacted our livelihoods. We are prone into thinking the women's liberation movement and the climate crisis are two separate struggles. The fact is, we cannot take on one fight without taking the other on. Women, in particular, Indigenous women, women of color, and women who reside in the global South are both disproportionately affected by the climate crisis and tasked with fixing it. It is estimated that 80% of those displaced by climate change are women. It is essential that we understand the relationship between the effects of climate change and the persistence of violence against women. The destruction of our environment and the oppression of women result from the same male-driven capitalist power struggle. Colonization, the patriarchy, and capitalism has given us a world where men are separated from women and humans are separated from nature. Nature is being abused while women are being subdued for the convenience of man. For us to deal with the climate crisis, women's liberation will need to be at the forefront of social, economic, and political aspects. In regard to climate change, we have already reached 1.2 degrees of warming, and we are on track to surpass the 1.5 degrees of warming that was set out in the 2015 Paris Agreement. At 2 degrees of warming, it will be a complete disaster for all living things on this planet. The sickness of the oil and gas industry's greed and our addiction to fossil fuels is a great threat to humanity. Their thirst for mass amounts of wealth by exploiting Mother Earth has no end in sight. Doug Ford and his conservative MPPs are encouraging this continued destruction and unchecked greed in Ontario by allowing new natural gas plants to be built in the province as a way to provide Ontarians with an increased need for energy. At a time when it is crucial to reduce our emissions and move towards a net zero clean energy grid, Doug Ford is leading Ontario to preventable disasters for decades to come by increasing emissions in the province 375% in the next 7 years and 600% in the next 15. This will disproportionately impact women in the province. The most recent approval of new natural gas plants is in my hometown, Windsor, Ontario. With the help of bought and paid for Windsor City councillors, Capital Power successfully submitted an application to expand their natural gas plant by adding not 1, but 2 additional natural gas turbines to their East Windsor natural gas plant. Windsor is already the 2nd most polluted city in Canada. Residents of Windsor are dealing with significantly increased costs of changing climate, with an increase in the frequency and severity of floods, shoreline erosion, drought, and heat waves. The increased emissions from methane gas and the new natural gas production in the city of Windsor is only going to escalate these environmental disasters. Single-parent households, which are mostly headed by women in Windsor, are low income, with 1 in 4 of these households already facing food insecurity. Increased droughts in the area will only further impact this insecurity. Windsor ranks poorly for gender equality. Out of 26 major cities across Canada, Windsor comes in 20th. Due to the massive gender pay gap in Windsor, women will suffer greater impacts of climate change than men who reside in the city. Increased floods will affect infrastructure, housing, and jobs. This inequality will make it difficult for women in the city to recover from these environmental disasters. The gender and income inequality for women in the city limits the capacity for us to deal with climate mitigation and adaptation. Women in Windsor lack economic, political, and legal power. We are severely underrepresented in the municipal government. Windsor has only 1 woman on city council, while women make up roughly 50% of the population in Windsor. It is absolutely crucial that women most impacted by the climate crisis lead on improvements to force change and protect the environment. Representation must include and lead with Indigenous women, women of color, and women who reside in the Global South. Research shows that women's leadership and equal partnership results in better outcomes for climate policies, reducing emissions, and protecting our biodiversity. The only way we will make any progress in tackling the climate crisis is if we put women's liberation at the forefront, ensuring we have access to equal pay, equal opportunities, and equal representation when it comes to decision making. We are at a crucial point in history, and we need to acknowledge and agree that liberating women will be one of the major solutions for the climate crisis. Thank you.
Elizabeth, you're
I
muted.
know I'm muted. I know. Okay, so thank you very much, April. Now we're going to go back to Emily, who's going to sing Union Made.
Yes, thank you again to all of the speakers for all the things we've talked about tonight. It's so, so important to keep all of these things in mind and to work together for a better and brighter socialist future. And with that, the old Union hymn, The Union Made. Now there once was a Union maid. She never was afraid of the goons and the gangs and the company things and the deputy sheriffs who made the raid. She went to the Union Hall where a meeting it was cold. And when the boys would come to her, oh, this is what she'd say. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union till the day I die. Now this union maid was wise to the tricks of the company spies. She'd take the dare, she didn't care. She'd always organize the guys, and she always got her way. When she struck for better pay, she'd show her card to the National Guard. Honey, this is what she'd say. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the. Now you women who wanna be free, just take a tip from me. Join your hands with the union friends, and in the 21st century, as Angela Davis found, we're all together bound, and race and class and gender join to stand our common ground. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union till the day I die. One more time. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union till the day I die.
Thank you very much, Emily. Thank you. So if you agree, folks, with what you heard during this program, or most of what you heard during this program, please join Socialist Action. Just sign up at our website, www.socialistaction.ca, or by calling 647-986-1917. And it's easy to remember, 1917 was the year of the Russian Revolution. So I want to give a special thanks to Emily, Sandra, Rubina, Tamara, Flo, Helen, April, Dave, and a special thanks to Angela from France. And of course, as I said, to Dave, our technical producer, and to Barry. Before I end, I want to let everybody know that the next essay webcast will be on Thursday, March the 23rd at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on a key issue of strategy and tactics. The United Front versus the Popular Front. That is Thursday, that's next Thursday, March the 21st at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And I would like to close tonight's webcast by some words from Rosa Luxemburg. She campaigned over a century ago, not only against imperialist war and for women's right to vote, but for women's self-organization inside the revolutionary socialist movement. Rosa wrote these words in 1912. The contemporary mass struggle for the political equality of women is only one expression and one part of the general liberation struggle of the proletariat, and therein lies its strength and its future. General, equal, and direct suffrage for women will, thanks to the female proletariat, immeasurably advance and sharpen proletariat class struggle. That is why bourgeois society detests and fears women's suffrage. And that is why we want to win it, and we will win it. And through the struggle for women's suffrage, we will hasten the hour when the society of today will be smashed to bits under the hammer blow of the revolutionary proletariat. Happy International Women's Day. The struggle continues. In the meantime, please be safe, stay healthy, and stay active. Bye for now.